Welcome to Spinning Back Clique Retreat here at MMA Junkie. We take a spin through the biggest topics in the sport. This week, we've got Mike Bond, Nolan King, and Goes. So let's just jump right into it. Guys, this past weekend, we saw the crowning of a new champion at Bellator with AJ McKee keeping his undefeated career record intact with a first-round swarming of Patricio Pitbull to take the belt, the Grand Prix title, and $1 million. Now, afterwards, McKee proclaimed himself as the best featherweight in the world right now. So let's ask one simple question. Is he right? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Mike, get it started.
Well, the fact that we're even having this conversation, and this is the leading question on this show today, is a win for Bellator, a win for AJ McKee, and a win for the sport as a whole. I mean, how many times can you legitimately have this discussion where we're really wondering, is someone who's not a UFC champion, not in the UFC, the best in the weight class? And can I definitively say yes or no? No, I can't, because we need to see the fights. But I think AJ McKee has a damn good case. He went out there and beat Patricio Pitbull as impressively as anyone possibly could. It was just such a great win for him, and I think it made a big statement, turned a lot of heads, and now you can kind of have that argument. I mean, Alexander Volkanovski, Max Holloway, Brian Ortega, those are some really tough matchups, and as we know, as AJ McKee will tell us every time, Brian Ortega choked him out when he was a 19-year-old. Obviously, that's a long time ago at this point, but maybe that tells you a little bit something about how that fight could potentially go. So if we were to get any of those matchups, I think they would be pretty close. The odds maybe like 2-1 or less for maybe the UFC guy. AJ McKee would be right there, but it's such a great thing for him that this is the conversation. But like, am I picking him over Alexander Volkanovski, over Max Holloway? Not quite yet. I think AJ McKee is unbelievable. I picked him to win this tournament from the very start. I felt he was going to beat Patricio Pitbull by stoppage, as he did, but I just don't know when you're talking about those actual head-to-heads. They're tough fights.
Yeah, it's great, like you said, for Bellator that we're even having this discussion. It shows McKee's skill level. But as you said, the limitations, we can't actually put those fights together. So what do you think, Nolan? Is there a way to definitively say if he's the best featherweight in the world?
I don't think we can say that, but I'm not going to rule it out either. So I'm going to kind of, as much as I don't like doing gray areas on Spinning Back, like I'm going to say maybe. And I think that part of the reason for that is usually when a fighter has this kind of surge and they go on and they face a long-standing champion and they win the belt, at least they're tested, or at least we see them tested, and we can kind of gauge where they might fall in the international interpromotion rankings. But we still haven't seen that from AJ McKee. I mean, he's flown through everyone, so I can't say that his ceiling is Alexander Volkanovski or Brian Ortega or whatever. I just don't know, because we haven't really seen what his weaknesses are. With that being said, I mean, just off the top of my head, from what I have seen, I do agree with Mike. I would have a tough time picking him against Alexander Volkanovski, just because I think we do know how good Alexander Volkanovski is, which is pretty damn good. But if you look at some of those top 5 guys in the UFC, I mean, I wouldn't rule out AJ McKee could beat them. I mean, I think Holloway would be tough. Could he beat Brian Ortega? Maybe. And then you start talking about Chan Sung Jung, Calvin, those type of guys. I think I would say that, those lines would definitely be closer, and I think you could pick McKee. But man, I'm not ruling it out, but I just can't say definitively just because we haven't seen him tested.
It's crazy how easy he's made this thing look, man. McKee has been on an absolute tear. Goes, what do you think? Is he the best 145er on the planet right now?
I don't think we can say that just yet. I mean, look, man, the kid's a monster. The first thing people are going to point at is the level of competition. But look what he's done with it, right? He's leaving zero doubts. There's a big zero in that loss column, and he's finishing opponents. These are all the type of things that we talk about when we talk about some of the greats, like Khabib, right? Isn't that zero a big point there? He's got a lot of things in his favor, but I think what makes him the most scariest is he can be a threat from just about any position, whether they're on their feet, if it goes to the ground. He shows so much promise. A guy like Pitbull, when you really dissect his resume and you look at what he's done, this is a lot bigger win than I think he's getting credit for. You could see guys like Michael Chandler, Eddie Alvarez, they've had success leaving Bellator. They've had success in the UFC. We know that the UFC has good fighters, but AJ McKee would be a bad matchup for a lot of them. And it's weird. Against Volkanovski, I think he has a pretty good chance. I think I'd pick him. But against a guy like Max Holloway, who's shown us time and time again what he could do, that might be a little tougher. So I think what it's going to come down to is a little bit more consistency and some title defenses.
It's going to be interesting to see where McKee goes from here, right? Because if he wants that definitive to say he's the best on the planet, it's going to be hard if he doesn't actually go fight those fighters in the UFC, right? But man, boy, Bellator's been awfully loyal to him through his career thus far. Does he want to stay there with the people that got him there? So it's going to be interesting to see what he does moving forward. Guys, also this past weekend at UFC on ESPN 28, Sean Strickland scored a dominant win over Uriah Hall to announce himself as a real middleweight contender. But more than his performance, people seem to be focused on his post-fight comments in which he said he would, and I'll quote it here, would love nothing more than to kill somebody in the ring. Now, I would say it should probably be noted that this comment came just after a discussion on masturbation and just before declaring himself a psychopath. So you got to take it with a little bit of context there. That said, was Strickland out of line for this comment? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Nolan, get us started.
Yeah, it's odd, right? Because we've talked about trash talk on this show before as recently as Conor McGregor's recent comments with Dustin Poirier. And, the whole killing trash talk in MMA has been something that's long existed. I know Dustin took exception of it in the Conor fight, and it kind of got brought to light more. I've never necessarily read into it as literally meaning kill. I think it's a hyperbolic expression, but the thing that threw me about Strickland was like, it was more than just like, I'm going to beat you up in a fight really bad. It was like, no, I actually want to do this. So I don't know if it was just material that fell flat or if that's actually the way he feels, but I mean, it was definitely, I don't want to say it rubbed me the wrong way, but it was definitely a bit odd. And it was a bit like, okay, well, somebody could actually die in the sport. So if that's actually what you're setting out for, that's kind of messed up. So, I mean, I'd like to think that it was just a hyperbole or something that he thought would be funny or catch some headlines, but it was a little bit too believable for me. And like you said, I mean, falling in between the masturbation and the psychopath quotes, I mean, it's right in order there. So I'm not really sure what to think of it. I think maybe it was a little bit too far just because it wasn't in the context of, hey, I'm going to beat you up really bad. It was like, no, this is what I want to do. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a weird one, man.
Yeah, weird one, I think, goes well with Sean Strickland, right? The more time we spend around him, he's a different kind of cat. There's no question about it. So, do we write him a pass for that and just say, well, Sean's just kind of an interesting character, or did he step over a line here?
I think we're asking the wrong people this question because we live in a society right now where a lot of people could say whatever they want, but a lot of them also face repercussions for what they say, right? If you look at the NFL, the NHL, like they all say crazy things too. But something happens when they do that. They get fined. They get talked to. I think what's missing here, guys, is consistency. We don't know from the UFC. Like we've seen in the past, Frank Mir make a comment somewhat similar to this, and bad things happen to Frank Mir. Then you see Conor McGregor do some of this stuff, and nothing really happens. So then that trickle effect starts to come down, I think, where fighters feel like, hey, we can say whatever the hell we want and not get in trouble. So I think at some point the UFC has to say, look, what is it that we stand for here? They have to stand up. There's a lot of kids in the audience in these fights, all right? A lot of young people. They affect a lot of people. I think they have to have some kind of stance here and say, look, going forward, we just don't condone these types of comments or we're an edgy sport. Just live with it. Who knows? But have some kind of stance. You saw what happened when Jeremy Stevens shoved Jakar Close. What happened? Next person that does that's off the fight card. Did anybody do it? No. So they have to have some sort of stance. For Sean Strickland, anybody who knows him, I don't think he really means those comments. But at the same time, you have to be willing to live with the consequences of saying what you say.
Yeah, that's an interesting point with the UFC being consistent on something. And what if they did come out and do something here? Then you say, well, how do you reconcile that with what Conor McGregor? Because they're not going to do anything to him. Let's just be honest. Mike, what do you think? Sean go too far here, or is that just Sean being Sean?
Yeah, I think, it's Sean being Sean, but he's consistently getting into a territory where he's saying the quiet part out loud, the things that you should probably keep to yourself. I mean, do I think maybe there's some genuine truth to that? Like, does he maybe want to express that type of behavior in the cage and, feel like it wouldn't be, a homicide or whatever you want to call it, a murder, because it happens, in that environment where they're signing waivers and all this stuff is happening. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure he's not the only fighter that's maybe had some dark thought like that, but you should keep that to yourself. And, as far as what these other guys are saying in terms of like setting a line, I mean, the UFC has set the line. Dana White has said many times over in this past year, we don't filter our fighters. They can say what they want, do what they want, whether it's political or otherwise. So we kind of know where this stands. It's been 2 days. The UFC hasn't released any statements. There's been, nothing from a manager making a comment, defending Sean or trying to set the record straight. So I think this is kind of going to be something that he says and nothing's going to come of it. And we're going to move forward. But yeah, he probably should have not said that loud. I think it was kind of a stupid thing to say, but Sean Strickland says a lot of stupid things, as we've come to realize.
Yeah, Sean's an interesting character. I don't think he necessarily thought that comment all the way through. But, the way I stand on it is you're right. I think leave that part quiet. Let's not talk about death. I mean, in the same way that we should leave race, religion, and politics out of trash talk, I think you should leave death talk out of the fight game because it is a combat sport. And unfortunately, that's a very real reality. Everything that somebody steps in there, it could happen. So let's leave that out of there. We guys at ESPN 28 co-main event saw Cheyanne Buys pick up a $50,000 performance of the night bonus, after which she admitted it was much needed because her bank account was negative heading into the night. So this revelation stirred quite the conversation on fighter pay, as you might imagine, which is admittedly quite a complex topic. But what did you think when you heard this quote from Buys? Goes, let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Get us started.
Well, right away, the human in me, I felt bad for her. Emotions started to come out for her, and I understood that situation. It's very difficult to be a fighter. When you see these paydays that they get, you tend to think all of it just goes into the bank. But, there's gym fees. There's training partners that sometimes you fly out. There's coaches getting their cut. So there are a lot of things that go into this. Nutrition. They don't get to keep all that. And the tax man gets everybody, right? So I think when it comes to fighter pay, you got to look at everybody individually. Like, I understand that she was in a tough situation, but I don't know who put her there. If it was mixed martial arts, if it was her, I don't manage her money. So I think it really comes down to every individual and how they do that. We've seen millionaires go broke, for crying out loud, right? So the UFC's done some things along the way. The PI helps a lot of fighters, right? They get their free meals, they get treatment, they get some training there. They've done things to help, but I think overall we could maybe do some changes here. Maybe a flat rate instead of this, take home half, or sometimes fighters take home half their pay. That tends to sting a lot. So I think there are changes that could be made.
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic, right? Because I think we'd all like to see these athletes make as much money as possible because we respect what they do. But here she is in her second UFC fight. I saw people complaining before the fight card, who is this chick and why is she in the co-main event? And then afterward, it's like, well, why isn't she getting paid way more money? So it's kind of a weird situation to be in. You can't have it both ways. Mike, what did you take out of this?
I mean, 4 minutes is not enough to talk about fighter pay in general. At first, when I saw her clip, I think like a lot of people, it was a little startling to just see how emotional she got. The fact she's talking about having a negative balance in her bank account. We saw how much that clip got retweeted and various people sharing it around and giving their take. It was just something that I think kind of put a spotlight on what we're dealing with. But John, you are right there. I mean, it's her second UFC fight. If we're talking about like what is UFC caliber, the definition of that has changed a lot in recent years. Maybe 10 years ago, Cheyanne Buys wouldn't even be in the UFC for maybe a few more years. She'd be on the regional scene getting, 3-3 or something like that. So she's making infinitely more on this platform than she would elsewhere. But that doesn't mean she couldn't still be making more on this platform, but I wrote it in my post-fight takeaways. I'll say it time and time again when we talk about fighter pay. It's the same thing that comes up. It's not on us to make this change. We've been talking about this stuff, you and I, John, for the better part of 10 years. It's not our responsibility to make the UFC change. They're going to try to make their money. They're going to do their thing. They're a business. They're running it. I get that. It's on the fighters to collectively get together and figure out how they can get a bigger piece of the pie. People talk about the NFL, the NHL, it's 50% range. UFC is 16 to 18%. I don't even think we're looking to get to 50%. If they made it 25%, 30%, that would be a massive change for the fighters' money. It would allow them to train better. It would raise the quality of the sport, all these different things. So on that front, fighter pay is an endlessly going on topic, but it's not our job to change it. It's on the fighters to create action that puts people like Cheyanne Buys in a better situation and everyone else.
Yeah, unless everybody wants to negotiate this individually, they're going to have to get together at some point if they want the industry to change as a whole. Nolan, what did you take out of these comments? Nobody just feels good for Cheyanne Buys.
Yeah, no, me neither. I mean, just hearing like 10 and 10, right? Think about that. So I always look at the baseline pay, and like those fighters, sometimes they go in there because she won. She got her bonus. But there's a lot of fighters that, go in there, they take a short notice fight up a weight class, they get knocked out in the first round. They get their $10,000 paycheck that has taxes come out of it that they have to pay their coaches for. And I just think like there shouldn't be athletes in the UFC, the highest level of the sport that's making so much money, and have them talk about how they're broke and that they're, can't make ends meet. Like if you want to be like the other sports, at least raise the percentages. Like Mike said, I mean, you can't pretend to be like the NFL and the NBA and then have this happening in the same breath,
Yeah, it's definitely not a good look. It's such a difficult balance to find, again, and I mean, this is no disrespect to Cheyanne Buys, but, how much interest is she generating after the fact? Quite a bit. But going in, people were saying, I don't even know why this is the co-main event. But as you're absolutely right. I mean, if we want the sport to be taken seriously, the athletes, can't be broke and talking about it. It's kind of not a great look for the sport. We guys, with the UFC and Bellator both in action at the same time on Saturday night, relatively little attention was paid to most of the undercards of both of them. So outside of the headliners of both UFC on ESPN 28 and Bellator 263, who grabbed your attention this weekend is just deserving of a little more love than they're getting right now? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock to shine a light on some of those athletes. Mike, get us started.
Yeah, I mean, no one screamed, I need to talk about him. I need to, follow up and interview this person or write a column. I think, we're paying attention to the appropriate people. But since we are asking this question, there is people that deserve spotlight under those circumstances. And to me, it's Jason Witt. I went to the only card I've been at the UFC Apex. It was back in March. He was the opening fight of the card, and he got knocked out in 16 seconds by Matthew Selmelsberger. And that was a very rough night for him. He came into this fight, was talking about how he made changes. He got some more sleep at night, which is kind of an interesting media day element. I haven't really heard too many fighters hammer home that much. So for him, yeah, I thought it was nice to come out there against Brian Barberena. They had the fight of the night, I believe. It was kind of an epic back and forth. He almost got put out in that third round. It was just some madness in there. So to see a guy go and get knocked out in such humiliating fashion and then come back, go 3 rounds, have his chin tested and pull through and then get that extra bonus, that was just kind of a nice feel-good story for me.
Yeah, no question about it. That was a heck of a fight and a great turnaround for him. And while you're at it, why not mention the other side of that fight? You said Brian Barberena. Think about what he was coming back from, a near fatal accident, and he's in there putting on a fight of the night. So unbelievable stuff from him too. Nolan, how about you? Who grabbed your attention this weekend?
Well, being at Bellator, I feel obliged to throw out a Bellator name. Mads Burnell in the co-main event of Bellator 263 against Emmanuel Sanchez. I thought for a submission guy that's known for Japanese neckties and all sorts of funky submissions, he hung in there with a scrapper and played, beat him at his own game. I mean, Sanchez is known to be one of those guys that loves to pressure. He loves to stand in the pocket. He loves to trade. And that's what Burnell did for the first two plus rounds before he really started going for takedowns and holding Sanchez down in the third. I thought his striking's come a long way. I mean, even if you go back and watch that fight, I saw someone cut together a highlight package of the striking exchanges. Burnell was throwing a lot less, but a lot less volume. But when he was throwing, he was landing, and he was avoiding a lot of the blows for Sanchez. He mixed it up on all levels: kicks, body shots, punches to the head. He's a guy maybe that the UFC let go a little too soon. Went 1-2 when he was 22, 23 years old. Was beating Arnold Allen in a fight that Arnold pulled off a very last-second rally sort of submission. So I think the UFC wrote off this guy too early. He's fun. He's good on the mic. And he's showing that he's a pretty good fighter too, representing Denmark, another part of the world that could use some big stage MMA representation.
Yeah, what a great performance that was from Burnell, a guy that I completely agree with. I think got a raw deal in the UFC, if I'm being completely honest with you. I was surprised when they didn't bring him back. Goes, how about you? A lot of fights to talk about. Who grabbed your attention?
I'm going to have to go back to Cheyanne Buys. I mean, really, what she did in the fight and what she did post-fight, I think the UFC needs to capitalize on a female like this. This girl is tough. I've called some of her amateur fights, so I've seen her for a very long time. And the one thing that you can always say about her, she's constantly improving. If you look at her last matchup, things didn't go her way, but it's night and day here. She's finally back at the gym that she loves. She's getting the training that she needs. She's a sweet girl. If you sit down and you talk to her, you'll notice she's very, very sweet. But if you push the right buttons, she turns into a hand grenade. And it seems like she has all of these little characteristics that some of the top girls that we've all talked about throughout the history of women's MMA, she has a lot of those characteristics. And I think they can build off of her. Right now, she's a little bit far from the very, very top. And I think by the time she gets there, maybe some of those girls might be gone. But I really think there's a lot of potential with Cheyanne. And I think you got to give her that spotlight. She's getting better, and she's going to really prove it, I think.
Gloria DePaula didn't find her to be so sweet. I'll tell you that, man. That was a vicious finish, but you're right. She deserves some love. Hey, listen, look, we didn't even talk about names like Usman Nurmagomedov. I mean, how fantastic does he look? Hassan Magomed Sharapov. I mean, maybe those are people that already had some shine on him anyway, but I thought they had some great performances. And how about over in the UFC, Melsik Bagdasaryan, man? What a great performance he had as well. So, man, there were so many great performances this weekend. I'm glad we could talk about some of them because sometimes, outside the main event, we got to find the hidden gems as well. Well, as we look forward to this weekend, guys, UFC 265 features an interim heavyweight title fight with Derrick Lewis and Ciryl Gane in Houston. While it's a great fight, it's also going to make things really complicated in the heavyweight title picture because you're going to have Stipe Miocic, John Jones, and the winner of this fight all having a legitimate case of being the next person to face Francis Ngannou. So let's put on the matchmaking hat and work this out. How do we sort out this mess going forward? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Nolan, tell us how it's going to play out.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird, right? Like you said, it's such a logjam. You have Stipe Miocic and John Jones, two of the biggest names in the sport, and they're not even involved in the interim title fight. So with that being said, I mean, whoever wins this weekend has to be next in line for Francis. You got an interim strap, whether you're Ciryl Gane or Derrick Lewis, you have done enough to earn that title shot. It's not these fighters' faults that there's all these negotiations that are falling through behind the scenes and disgruntled stars, whatever. And it seems like the promotions put them in the position to be next for Francis. So that's what you got to do. That's the right thing to do at this point, at this stage in the game, which leaves John Jones and Stipe Miocic, your two arguably biggest names in that division, without a fight. So to me, if those two guys want a big fight, if they want to stay active, they're going to have to fight each other. And I know that I would not want to be in the negotiating room for that one. Between the UFC, Stipe and Jones, there's enough issues to go around, but I think that's the fight to make. There's going to be some incentive for both those guys. It could headline a pay-per-view without even having a title on the line. So if they can get that done, which is a big if, I think that's the way to go, and then have Francis fight the winner of Derrick versus Ciryl Gane.
Stipe and John would absolutely be an incredible fight, but as you said, man, getting those guys to agree on it, I don't know. It's going to be tough. So here's the thing, right? I mean, it's an interim title fight, and you say it should be next, and I tend to agree with you, but everybody's saying, what does this interim title do for us anyway? So it goes, I mean, does the interim title holder have to be next, or can we put him on hold and maybe bring in one of those other guys? What's the play here?
Nah, I think it has to be next. Unfortunately, it's the UFC that kind of created this mess. It was already a mess before they decided to introduce this belt and make it even more of a mess. But you want to clear things up, man, show footage of other UFC fighters hitting Francis Ngannou in the gut while he's eating ice cream and him not caring. I think a lot of them would run for the hills. But when you look at the situation that we have here, I think the winner of Gane and Lewis has got to be next. But then what do you do with a guy like John Jones? You're not going to give him a fight that doesn't revolve around a belt. It's too risky, right? But he can't sit around forever. And you have Stipe Miocic, who's one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, and he's going to be begging for a rematch when he has a victory over the current champion. Things shouldn't be this way right now, but I think what's going to happen is you're going to get a John Jones sitting there like Clubber Lang and Rocky, just shouting out at whoever wins that fight. He's going to have next, and unfortunately, I think it's going to be Stipe Miocic, guys. He's the guy that's really going to have to take a fight in between here. He's going to have to wait and face the winner. He's not going to get a fight for at least, I think, a year and a half. And what if injuries happen, guys? This is just a complete mess.
Yeah, I think that's what's bothering me the most, Goes. I mean, we're talking about all-time greats in Stipe and John. I mean, some of the best to ever do it, and we're losing time with them. We're missing out on performances that I'd like to see. I want to see these guys in the cage. So, Mike, what do you think? I mean, is that interim, is that the way to go? Is there another way to interject one of these guys? How do we clean up this mess right now?
I don't think it's as messy as we're making it out to be, quite honestly. I mean, I think we're going to get this fight this weekend, and the winner will fight Francis Ngannou, hopefully this year, November, December. And, Stipe Miocic is there. I don't want to see him rushing back regardless. I know we're kind of getting closer to that time, but man, that was a bad knockout he took. And a lot of people are saying maybe he should sit out for a year. So that keeps him out till, first quarter next year. And I think it's ultimately after we get Ngannou versus the winner of this interim title fight, it's just going to come down to negotiations. I think they're going to go back to John Jones because that is the biggest fight to make, who said he's probably not going to fight till next year. And if they can find a dollar amount and find a proper deal, John Jones will be there. If they don't, they will go to Stipe Miocic, and he will end up fighting the winner of Ngannou versus this interim title fight. And I think it shakes out pretty simply, but it's all going to come down to negotiations. If they can find a deal with John Jones, he will be there. If not, they will go to Stipe Miocic.
It could work out that simply. We'll see how it plays out. I think we might have a whole lot of complaining in between about people saying they deserve to be next. I don't know if they're all going to see it playing out quite as simply, but we'll see how it all goes down. First, though, we got to get the UFC 265, find out who comes out of that as the interim heavyweight champion. We'll talk about that and everything else next week on Spinning Back Clique.